Yeah, public feeding in the First World War is the issue of my talk. I will present some results of my PhD project, which is still in progress, and it's the first time that I have the opportunity to talk in English about my project, so I'm a little bit nervous, and I really hope you will understand everything, and if I'm too fast, please do not hesitate to tell me. Yeah, the main topics of my project are the war kitchens of Berlin and Vienna and their influence on the private family meal during and after the war. Overall, it's a very complex issue. Therefore, I've decided to limit my today's talk to the development of the war kitchens and their acceptance by Berliners and Viennese during the second half of the war. Yeah, it's a matter of common knowledge that Germany and Austria were faced with serious food supply problems during the years of warfare. And within the framework of introducing a number of rationing and price control measures, public feeding institutions were introduced in many cities. This was not only seen as an important measure to feed large parts of the population, but also to simplify the women's and families' everyday wartime routine. In the management of food supply in the cities, many German and Austrian municipalities cooperated with philanthropic and charitable associations and set up public kitchens during the first weeks of the war. Berlin and Vienna, both cities with more than 2 million inhabitants, were two of these cities which made early experiences in the field of public charitable dining in wartime. The administrations of both cities were supported by different private charities with comprehensive expertise in the public provision of meals and developed large networks of emergency kitchens. These mainly improvised kitchen systems provided meals for thousands of needy residents on a daily basis and ensured the ability of both cities to adequately cushion the hardship of their populations. However, most of these kitchens were reserved for the needy who were willing to verify their indigence. In early 1916, it became obvious that more and more people suffered hardship. Large parts of the middle class and many employed, especially female laborers, lived on the verge of the subsistence minimum. Difficulties in the supply of food became pervasive in people's lives. Besides the lack of foodstuffs and high prices that caused supply problems, the increased growth of female employment in factories was another issue that hampered the self-supply of a large part of the population. Women did not longer have time to line up for hours in front of grocery stores, and the overall situation called for action by military and state authorities. Having in mind prospective supply crisis and the growing number of people in need, authorities were forced to find a long-term solution. The officials came to the conclusion that a general provision of public meals could provide a comprehensive approach to tackle the change brought by the war economy as well as the food supply crisis. In the following, I will give a short overview on the developments of public feeding in Berlin and Vienna. And we will see that the acceptance of public meals was different in the cities. In the second part of my talk, I will present an argument and discuss the contrasting developments. So let's start with Berlin. In April 1916, the city of Berlin received instructions by the Prussian Ministry of the Interior and the state government to expand its emergency kitchen facilities and to set up municipal meal halls that would serve as a role model for other German cities. As Berlin's Mayor Adolf Wermuth pointed out, from the point of view of the state authorities, public kitchens were kind of a universal remedy, a solution for any food supply problem. But Wermuth and other city officials were not convinced that a public meal program would solve the city's supply problems in the long run. In their opinion, governmental aid in the form of securing a regular food supply would be a greater benefit for Berlin's administration and the city's food supply problems. However, Berlin City Council yielded to the pressure of state authorities and decided to terminate the cooperation with Berlin's mainly autonomously operating philanthropic kitchen providers. In the summer of 1916, the city introduced a completely new central kitchen system that became the largest experiment of municipal-sponsored dining halls, called Volksspeisung. Within 10 weeks, the city had assembled the kettles, cooks, and storage space to create 250,000 quarts of soup per day. The Volksspeisung comprised 11 central kitchens, which were set up in Berlin's big market halls. In addition, around 70 meal supply stations were set up in school gyms. The facilities were spread throughout the city, but the majority of supply stations was concentrated in the working class districts. Nevertheless, regardless of social classes and income differences, the meal halls aimed to offer a midday meal for every city dweller without verification of indigence. At the same time, Berlin's prestigious Volksspeisung was to demonstrate that the state had assumed control of the challenging food supply issue. State and city administrations hoped for great success of the public dining system that was financed by extensive state subsidies. However, these expectations proved to be false. Berlin's food supply situation was not capable to meet the requirements of the large-scale feeding program. Long before its establishment, the city was recurrently faced with supply shortages. As city officials correctly assumed, to guarantee cheap, tasty and enough dishes, the Volksspeisung, that should be supplied by preference with foodstuffs, depended on constant and sufficient food deliveries. But there was no sufficient food supply. As a result, Berliners complained about the lack of quality and quantity of the offered meals and stayed away. The Volksspeisung was capable of feeding up to 20% of the capital's population, around 250,000 people. In fact, not even half of them made use of the kitchens during times of crisis. In general, the facilities were frequented by 3 to 5% of Berliners on average. Obviously, the new public meal halls did not meet the needs of Berliners. The historian Belinda Davis pointed out how strong the people's refusal to reveal their indigence was. Hungry women remained resigned to running helplessly in the bitter cold from municipal sales outlet to retail shop and to protesting violently in the streets, still finding this more respectable than mass dining. But the Volksspeisung was not the only public meal provider in Berlin. There were other private kitchen operators, and many of them were already part of Berlin's emergency kitchen system until the Volksspeisung was introduced. Here you can see a map. It's not, I hope you can see it. There you can see almost all public kitchens in Berlin during the First World War, and the blue dots were the meal halls at the Volksspeisung, and the other ones were private meal providers. The most prominent competitor of the Volksspeisung was the philanthrope Hermann Abraham, who was Berlin's main operator of middle-class kitchens and eateries for civil servants. Abraham's kitchen demonstrated that especially middle-class Berliners did not entirely reject the public meal at all. Between July 1916 and August 1917, Abraham's Verein für Kindervolksküchen issued about 50 million portions, and the number of Abraham's kitchens increased steadily as well. At the end of 1917, his Verein operated almost 70 kitchens. The acceptance of Abraham's facilities appeared to be stronger than the acceptance of the city's meal halls. Among their peers, Berliners were willing to eat in public kitchens. While the Volksspeisung, which was designed for everyone, failed in practice, Abraham's facilities, as well as factory canteens and many other similar facilities, proved that an individual offer of public meals was worthwhile. So after this trimmed-down overview on Berlin, let's have a look on the developments in Vienna. Vienna experienced state intervention as well as Berlin, but it happened half a year later in January 1917. Before the government interfered in Vienna's public feeding activities, the city itself realized that the emergency kitchens for the needy, the so-called Ausspeisungen, were no longer a contemporary answer to the widespread hardship among the population. City officials wanted to react to the new needs of persons concerned. Vienna did not have the same resources and instruments as Berlin to completely reorganize its public kitchen system. The city depended on a further cooperation with philanthropic associations and initiatives. But the collaboration of city and philanthropy worked efficient due to fixed rules that were defined by the city council in the beginning of the war. In summer 1916, Vienna introduced the so-called Kriegsküchenaktion. The previous system of emergency kitchens, the Ausspeisungsaktion, has been extended and customized to the new potential public kitchen visitors. In addition to the emergency kitchens, the city government set up a network of war kitchens that were dedicated to the middle class people, but in principle they were open to all. The meal prices were cheap, and unlike the Ausspeisungen, no verification of indigence was needed. Between 1916 and 1918, a total of 68 war kitchens were created that were scattered over the entire city area. In doing so, Vienna's authorities tried to take the people's needs into account. Most of the kitchens were opened in the most populous districts. Furthermore, some of the facilities were catered to specific occupational categories. Despite their continuous extension, the war kitchens quickly reached their limits. In winter 1916-17, it was obvious that the facilities were already unable to keep up with the rush of kitchen visitors. At the same time, Austrian state authorities tried to gain control of public feeding activities in the cities. The state issued a decree that proposed the comprehensive regulation of existing war kitchens and promoted the founding of further public feeding institutions. Afterwards, a large number of factory canteens, company kitchens, kitchens for public servants, and community kitchens for the middle class were founded in Vienna. All of them were operated by different associations and employees of various companies and government offices. These kitchens were exclusively reserved for the members of the different institutions. That means they were not open to all city dwellers. Even though these kitchens were kind of competitors for the municipal war kitchens, the city government was aware that alternative meal halls were necessary. In that respect, local authorities regarded public feeding as joint task that could benefit the whole city society. Towards the end of the war, more than 500 public kitchens and meal halls operated in Vienna. All of them, the city's war kitchens, that are the red and the blue dots in the map, and the other kitchen providers not only struggled with growing food supply problems that hampered a continued cooperation of the kitchens, but also struggled with dissatisfaction of the kitchen's audiences. Complaints regarding poor quality of the meals went hand in hand with the deterioration of the food supply situation. Nevertheless, the rush of hungry Viennese for public meals steadily increased. In the middle of 1918, at least 450,000 people visited Vienna's public feeding facilities daily. Up until the end of the war, both the people's hardship and the general use of the public kitchens continued to increase. Therefore, it can be concluded that around 500,000 people made use of the existing public feeding network in the end of 1918. So what are the results and what is my main argument? Similar to both cities was that the efforts in the field of public feeding increased during the war. Both city councils aimed to support large parts of the population with warm dishes every day. However, neither Berlin nor Vienna were able to achieve a comprehensive supply of public meals. But a straight comparison of the performance of Berlin's and Vienna's war kitchens reveals significant differences regarding the numbers of participants. While Berliners made solely use of the public meal at times, the numbers of kitchen visitors in Vienna steadily rose until the end of the war. The major reason why people made use of public kitchens was the challenging food supply situation. Food supply problems in Vienna were much worse than in Berlin, and that appears to be the most obvious explanation. But in my opinion, it's too easy to trace the stronger use of Vienna's public feeding institutions solely to poor supply conditions. Despite the widespread hardship among the population of both cities, people could not easily be convinced of the public meal. In both cities, the majority of people refused to make use of public kitchens. Furthermore, a strengthened urge for domestic preparation of meals was prevalent. This can be understood as a wish to maintain halfway familiar conditions. War changed the living conditions of families as well as the life together. Regarding the everyday routine of war, preservation of the private family meal, as paltry as it was an attempt to preserve old pre-war habits and through this one's own identity as well. The domestic table fellowship represented a social status which many people were afraid to lose. Not only middle-class residents, but also many working-class people avoided the public meal because they were afraid that they would be spotted by acquaintances while visiting the kitchens. So, people clearly equated the public kitchen attendance with social descent. The increasing use of Vienna's public kitchens and the strong desire of Berliners and Viennese to keep up their traditional and ordinary private family meal at home suggests that the Viennese public feeding management was more efficient in responding to the needs of the people than Berlin's public feeding activities. I argue that the acceptance of public kitchens and people's decision to make use of them were also related to the municipal organization of public feeding. In the beginning of the war, Berlin and Vienna started their public feeding activities under the same conditions. But in the organization of the emergency kitchens, the city councils already played different roles. While the officials in Berlin tended to hold themselves back and to left the main kitchen organization to the different private meal providers, Vienna's officials decided to take the lead in public feeding activities. In the organization of the Ausspeisungsaktion during the first half of the war, officials gathered experiences in the field of public feeding. In the summer of 1916, when the expansion of public feeding was considered necessary and the reorganization of Vienna's public kitchens took place, these vast experiences were essential. Contrary to Berlin, Vienna started and managed the reorganization of public feeding autonomously, as well as without order and financial support by the state. Due to its few available resources and opportunities to extend the city's public kitchen network, the cooperation with Vienna's philanthropy was the only viable option to guarantee the daily meals for large parts of the population. But that was not necessarily a disadvantage. The continued cooperation with Vienna's philanthropy within the organization of the new Kriegsküchenaktion presented a kind of firm stance of the city council on its previous public feeding activities. The city's limited scope of action also led to the fact that the war kitchen activities started as a small supply system. Concurrently, it was capable of being extended. Before opening further kitchens, the city council had the opportunity to evaluate the problems of already operating facilities. When it became apparent that many people preferred kitchens with clearly defined groups of participants, city officials tried to respond to these needs and set up a number of semi-public war kitchens. Thereby, they demonstrated flexibility with regard to the people's needs. Flexibility was also present in the officials' acceptance of alternative private kitchen providers who were not primarily seen as competitors, but as necessary support. Finally, with regard to the acceptance of public feeding, the question of continuity was not unimportant too. While Berlin decided to reorganize public feeding from the bottom up in summer 1916, Vienna continued to manage its decentral public feeding network during the 4 years of war. A glance at other cities with early established long-term kitchen systems that experienced heavy demand, like in Hamburg or in Dresden, allows to the assumption that the earlier a system was introduced, the better it worked. On the one hand, early introduced public meal systems were already tested during the first food crisis of the war. Due to these early experiences, the city administrations were able to optimize their systems regarding to respective crisis and increased hardship. On the other hand, the kitchens represented a kind of continuity. The Viennese had time to accept the new institution as a necessary relief effort and got much more time to get used to the existing public feeding network. On all these points, the course of public feeding activities in Berlin was different. Instead of community cooperation, Berlin City Council decided to compete with private public kitchen operators. Unlike Vienna, Berlin's officials had not have vast experience in the field of public feeding. While the setup of the Volksspeisung, the city council also ignored the offers of assistance from these experienced philanthropic meal providers. Berlin's officials believed that the Volksspeisung would be the only way to achieve equal distribution of food for Berliners. The Volksspeisung's main competitor Abraham pointed out, the city's kitchens were set up to conform to an abstract ideal of equitable distribution, not to fulfill the actual needs of real people. The whole kitchen system was established within a few weeks without taking requests of potential participants into account. Contrary to Vienna, after the setup of the large-scale meal hall system, Berlin had no opportunities to adapt the kitchens to the people's needs. The continued existence of many emergency kitchens, like Abraham's middle-class kitchens, and their high level of participation during the second half of the war confirm that Berliners were at least willing to make use of the public meal, but most of them preferred to preserve a sense of personal identity. Contrary to Vienna, Berlin's public feeding management in general lacked autonomous acting, continuity, flexibility, and firm stance. Unlike Vienna, Berlin's officials were not convinced of their own actions. During the whole war, doubts concerning the advantages of public feeding were pervasive in Berlin's city council, and this did not remain unnoticed by Berliners. Autonomous acting, firm stance, flexibility, and continuity can be seen as relevant factors that had effects on the people's acceptance of public feeding. Vienna's public feeding management was heavily characterized by these factors. At the same time, and this will be the end of my talk, it must be stressed that this was less the result of structural proceeding. Due to Vienna's limited scope of action, it was rather the effect of improvised acting. Thank you very much for your attention.
So I thought that was great, actually. What a great way to start our workshop. Brilliant to have something straight away comparative, translational. I'm sure lots of people have lots of questions. I have one question,
Yeah.
Which sort of comes out of my experience of looking a little bit at this in Milan, and that's that you didn't mention at any point what the political colour, for want of a better word, was of these two municipalities and how that related to their governments. Just really found, I mean, I know enough about Vienna to know that I'm assuming that Vienna was a socialist council at that point, or a social democrat. You can tell me, I could be wrong.
You're wrong. No.
But I'm certainly thinking that that's always had that dimension. So, and certainly in Milan that was the case, for example, and that's affected quite strongly the way I think that people responded to the public's viewpoints there. So I wondered if you could say a bit about that, because I do think that one of the themes that comes out from what you're saying, and I think from what we'll be talking about a lot today, is the way that individuals respond to efforts made to cater to them, and that we kind of have to turn in the way that you did round that argument. So I'm interested in the political colour and whether that affects the way that actually the population in the city thinks about what's being provided for them, by whom it's being provided.
Yeah, the political colour, yeah, you are wrong. There was no social democratic city council in Vienna, and as well as in Berlin. There was, yeah, I would say they were more conservative, the city council, but it is true that the Social Democrats had much more influence during the war, and especially after the war. It's also one of my topics in the PhD project, to have a look on the after-war period and the influence of Social Democrats in this question. But there were, yeah, I would say the Social Democrats were very loud during the war, and they fought for the public kitchen for everyone. So they were present, and I think they had an enormous influence on the people. But I would say their influence was in Berlin much stronger than in Vienna, so that's not the same that I was talking about. So yeah, there was another question, I think, or
I think it was more of an invitation to people to come in.
Okay, okay.
So I think there's so many broad things that you've raised.
Yeah.
So should we open it up? Yeah. Yeah.
Well, something on chronology, because you started talking in 1916, which is actually, I think, a turning year in the war, with the rise of the Ludendorff and Hindenburg government in military government in Germany. And I was wondering, as you talked about the relation between the local state and the central state, but what about the relationship with the military? What was the...
It was,
everybody's assuming that military took overhand on civil society.
That's true. I would say that the moment when the state authorities interfered in Berlin's public meal program or public feeding activities, the military state was behind the state authorities. They were working both on the same, and the military wanted to have public feeding institutions in whole Germany. They were absolutely convinced that the public meal halls would be the best option to feed large part of the population, and they were not really satisfied with the actions in Berlin, and afterwards promoted the introduction of factory canteens, so to feed large parts of the working class, who were the most important for the military work in factories and the war factories. So yeah, that was
Was there a difference with Vienna in that point of view?
Yeah, in Vienna, I would say the state authorities as well as the military was much more influenced in the whole actions in Vienna from the beginning of the war, but they were not really interested in promoting public feeding or stuff like this. So it was a totally self-made city project to feed the people with public feeding institutions. So the intervention in 1917 was more a last try to make the situation better in the city. But I told you that many other canteens and kitchens and middle-class kitchens were opened afterwards, and this was mainly a result of the state intervention. But I think it would also have happened without the state intervention, because the people realized there's nothing to feed the people, and the kitchens were self-made by the Viennese and the city.
Okay. Let's move on, Rachel.
That was so fascinating, Jenny, and I'm really interested in your comments about food and identity.
Mm-hmm.
This notion that government knows what calories people need and how to give it to them, but funnily enough, they don't always want to take them in that way, do they? And the little bit I've looked at in wartime kitchens, which were a British parallel to this.
Yeah.
And also in soldiers' dining, is that the working classes in Britain never ate out. They always ate in Britain, cafes. It's the lower middle class at best, and it was before the First World War. The working class people, they bought stuff on the street maybe and took it home, but the concept of eating together, sort of commensality, was alien to them. So I wondered what the situation was like in Germany and Austria at the time.
I would say it was the same. I also we'll have a look on the pre-war developments in Vienna and Berlin, and the family table, and especially the working class people were forced to what is the word? They wanted to have the family table during the war. And and that was mainly it was really important for them, and that was the main reason why they tried to pick up the food in stores when they were available and to take them home and to make their food for themselves. So they don't wanted to go in the public kitchen. But the Volksspeisung also offered the meals for takeaway. So most of them preferred to pick up the meals and take them home and to eat with the family.
Corinne?
I was just wondering about the response of the charitable organisations that have been running these kitchens before to the government interventions.
In Vienna, they were absolutely convinced to do this. They thought it is the right way. There was also I don't know how to answer. I think in Vienna they were interested in doing this, and in Berlin it was I think the same. They wanted to do that, and they had the opportunity to do it for 2 years. And then the city council decided, no, we are doing our own thing, and you can do your own if you want. And they were really disappointed, I think, especially to the fact that the city thought all the food what we get is going into the Volksspeisung, and the other private meat providers have to see where they get their food. And there were many conflicts between the philanthropical kitchen providers and the city council.
I have a very brief question, which has to do with refugees in Vienna, because there were in Vienna lots of refugees, in particular Jewish refugees, and in Berlin we
not so much,
not so much, or at least not at the end of the war. Did they use the communal kitchens or not?
It is a very important issue in Vienna, and there were many private kitchen providers for Jewish people, and but there were also Hermann Abraham was a Jewish man, and he also introduced some kitchens for Jewish people. But I think that was in Vienna it was much more important, and I think the pressure of the city council to do something in this way was also much bigger than in Berlin.
Okay. Let's give Jenny a big round of applause.